Hi, my name is Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society, and I'm here to teach you how to do a survey for the Pacific Northwest Bumble Bee Atlas or the Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas. They both have pretty much the same survey protocols. So I'm here today. I'm in a beautiful natural area. It's a nice, warm, sunny day. I've got my net and I have some vials in my pocket, so I'm pretty much ready to do a survey. The first thing you want to do is make sure that the site is big enough. It needs to be about a hectare. And a hectare is about the size of a football field, lengthwise, square. So sort of a football long and the same distance wide. It's 100 square meters, so a football field, including the end zones. Another way to think about it is the infield of a track. If you ever ran track, the entire infield on the inside of a running track is about a hectare, or a soccer field is also about a hectare. So you want to make sure it's big enough. And then usually what I do once I decide that it's a big enough site is I walk around and I make sure that there's enough flowering resources. You want to make sure that there is something that bees could be visiting. Otherwise, it's probably not worth really conducting a survey, or maybe come back at a later date when there are flowers. One of the things you want to do when you're out pre-walking your site is make sure you're keeping an eye out for inconspicuous flowers. Sometimes flowers will grow down amongst the grass, but they can be important for bumblebees and often are. This plant is called self-heal and often grows underneath the understory or overstory of grass and is a great bumblebee plant. Another important thing when we're out looking for bumblebees is we want to make sure we're looking at all blooming plants. If I was standing here looking in this patch, I might be drawn to the violets, to the dandelions, or maybe to the bluebells over here. But in reality, one of the most attractive plants in this patch has green, inconspicuous flowers, but bumblebees love it. This is a plant called waterleaf, and the flowers aren't quite open yet because it's still very early in the season here. But these little green guys here are going to bloom into little, beautiful little flowers that hang down sort of under the understory, and they often can't be seen. But bumblebees like Bombus flavifrons and other long-tongued species really love these flowers and will visit them. So while you may not be drawn to them with your own eyes, it's really important to pay attention to what's blooming and making sure that we're spending time looking at all the flowering resources on the landscape, looking for different species of bumblebees. Other things you may want to look for as you're doing a pre-walk around your site are things that may be a potential hazard. You may want to avoid plants like poison oak or blackberry, although it is notable that both of these plants do flower and can be attractive to bumblebees. You'll also want to look out for holes or other things to avoid, like electric lines, fences, barbed wire. Just make sure you're safe while you're doing your survey. You also want to keep an eye out for property lines to make sure you're not crossing from public land onto private land. And also keep an eye out for areas that you may want to spend a couple more minutes, areas with high quality forage that you know are especially attractive to bumblebees. Or keep an eye out for blooming trees, meaning don't forget to look up. There are sometimes flowers that are above your head that can also be attractive to bumblebees. Once you've finished your pre-walk, you're ready to start your survey. Materials that you want to make sure that you have with you before you begin your survey are an insect net, jars to place your bumblebees, a cooler with crushed ice. Make sure you have a timer. And then for processing your bees, you'll need your data sheets as well as a camera. We recommend having a dedicated camera, ideally with a macro function, but in a pinch, a smartphone can work as long as you learn how to control your white balance and take high quality photos with it. I typically set up a station in the middle of my survey area, which has the cooler and the area where I'll process the bees later. And then I grab a handful of vials and head out to go conduct my survey. And when you're conducting your survey, you want to make sure it's 45 minutes long, and that's 45 person minutes. So if you're doing it with a friend, you would do it for 22 and a half minutes. And if you did it with two other friends, it would be for 15 minutes. You just want to have 45 total minutes of search time. The important thing also is that when you're doing a survey, you want to pause the timer while you catch a bee. So it's 45 minutes of searching, not 45 total minutes. So you want to pause the timer when you catch a bee, and while you're putting that bee into a vial, and while you're putting that vial into the cooler. That doesn't count for your search time. The other thing that's important while you're doing your survey is you want to make sure that you're associating every bee observation that you have with a flower. So one of the important things about the Atlas project is we want to learn what resources that bees are using. So while you're out collecting bees off of flowers, you want to make sure to record that information so that we can gather it later and use that information when we analyze the data from the project. So with each bee that you capture, you want to also record the flower on which you captured it. Catching a bumblebee in a net is not an easy task. It takes a lot of practice. So one of the things that we recommend is that you spend some time practicing in your backyard before you go out and actually conduct your survey. That way you'll get some competency and some confidence so that when you see a bumblebee during your survey, you'll actually be able to net it. There are really two different ways to go after a bumblebee on a flower. One way is to just swing your net and try to catch it in there like this. The important thing is after you've swung, you want to make sure to turn your net over to close the bottom of it so that the bee doesn't come flying right out into your face. There's a number of ways to do that. I like to do a little flip, but the easiest way to do it is to swing and then just turn the net over 1-2 times. And then you'll have the bee in this section of the net that's laying over the top. The other way to go after a bee instead of sweeping is to just go over the top and drop the net on the bee like that. That way the bee will be trapped in the net. The next step then would be to grab the bottom of the net and pull it up to the top, and the bee will fly right to the top of the net because it's attracted to the sun. Let's see if we can find some bees to practice on. Sometimes you just have to go and follow for her a bit. She looks like she's looking for a nest, so they can be really hard to track. But we can just throw the net over the top of them like that sometimes while they're flying. And I got her. I can see her moving in the net there. So what I do is I pull the net then up to the top and make sure she's under there. I see her right in there, and then I can put her in the vial. Okay, so now that I have a bee in the net, what I need to do is get the bee from a net into the vial. And the way I'm going to do that, she's somewhere in this folded over area. I can see her crawling around right here. And so what I want to do is make sure she gets all the way down to the bottom of the net. So what I can do is I can just take the net and just go back and forth a couple of times and then fold it over, and then I like to grab it when I know she's above my hand here. So I know that she's between my hand and the bottom of the net. And then I can take my jar, take the top off, but I want to keep that cap close by. And so then what I do is I stick the jar into the net, and it goes through my hand here, okay, so that there's no way for the bee to get out. And then what I can do is just sort of move the net around until I'm sure that I have the bee in the net. And unfortunately, my net is very dirty, so it's hard for me to see. But I can hear her. I know she's in there. And usually you'll hear that sound when you know she's in your jar. I know that she's in the jar. And now I can just use the net basically as the top of my jar. So I'm just going to reach my hand in, and again, I'm going to grab that plastic vial, and I'm just pulling the top of the net over the top of the jar, so the net is still serving as the top until I get to the edge, and then I'm just going to slide it directly into and put the cap directly on, and then I can close the top and I can see the bee there in the jar. And that is how you transfer, or at least one method for transferring a bee from a net into a jar. Okay, so now I want to show you another method for getting a bee from a net into a vial. You can see the bees crawling around in the vial right here, and I'm sorry, in the net right there, and I want to get her into the vial. So one thing is a good thing to do. Some people just aren't comfortable holding the net while they do this, so they like to put it on the ground. But you can see if I hold the net straight up, the bee will fly all the way to the top of the net, okay? And then I can move forward. So some people just like to set it on the ground and then use the ground sort of as the cap, and then stick the vial into the net. And then again, same principle. You can pin the bee against the net as the top, and then you can stick your other hand in there and just put the cap on, and then you'll have the bee in the jar. Simple as that. And then what we want to do is we want to take the bee once it's in a vial, and we're going to put it into the ice pack. And it's ideal to stick it as far into the ice as we can so that the ice is completely surrounding the bee, and then it'll chill very quickly so that we can take the photographs that we need to take. Normally, one of the things that I would do in this situation is I would take the flower that I captured this bee on, and I would put it into the jar so that later when I was processing my bees, I could know which flower that I caught this bee on. And keeping track of that is very important for the data we're collecting for the Atlas project. Or in this case, because this bee wasn't visiting a flower, it was just flying around, it's not going to have any floral association. So if I don't put a flower in there, then I'll know that when I process my data later. But if I'd captured this bee on, say, a dandelion, I could come over to a dandelion flower and just grab the flower off and pretty easily just tuck the flower into the jar with the bee. And then later when I process this bee, I'd have the flower and the bee in the same jar so that I can keep track of it. Other people like to take notes and have a notebook, and they will number their vial and say this would be bee number 1. They could go bee number 1 and they would write down the flower, or take a picture of the bee next to the flower. There's lots of different ways to keep track of it. We don't care which way you do it. We just care that you do it. So when I finish my survey, I like to get a station set up to take my photographs. I want to make sure that I have everything I have and everything I need before I get started, because when I take the bees out of the cooler, they're going to start warming up, and I want to make sure that I have everything. So I want to make sure that I have my data sheet and a pencil that has lead in it. So I want to make sure I can take my notes. And I want to make sure that I have my camera. The other thing I like to do is make sure that my camera is set so the pictures I'm going to take are appropriate for the lighting conditions. So I usually will take a cap of a vial or something like that and make sure that I have my camera in the right settings before I get started, so I don't have to wait while the bee is warming up. So I get it in my macro setting and make sure that the pictures that I take look good. So here I am, I'm going to take a picture, and that looks pretty good. You can see here it looks pretty good. I could probably add a little bit of light. It's a little bit dark, so I may change the white balance a little bit, but for the most part it looks pretty good. So once I'm ready and I've got the information that I need, I can start processing my bees. But first I want to make sure I've filled out the top of my data sheet. So I have my site name and my grid cell ID in here, along with the date and the survey method, my weather information, and the surveyors and the survey time. All of that's entered on the data sheet, and I can get ready to enter the bees. Now each line on your data sheet here is going to represent a vial. So each bee that you captured gets its own line. So you're going to enter what bumblebee species that you think it is, its host plant, and then the photo numbers that you need, that you took of that bee. I'm going to move and process my bees in the direct sunlight here because it often will take a different picture, or a better picture, if you have direct sunlight. Sometimes it's too bright. You just have to take a look at the pictures that come out of your camera and adjust your settings and your location appropriately. And I can't stress this enough. I get way too many photos that people took that are out of focus, or are too bright, or are too dark. And if someone goes through all of this trouble of collecting bees, puts bees in jars and bees in the jars in a cooler, and then takes pictures that doesn't allow me to identify them, a lot of that effort has been wasted. So taking pictures is really the most important thing that you can do. And I want you to make sure to get your settings right and take the time you need to get the best pictures that you can. So I'm ready, my station's all set up, I have everything I need. I can grab my first bee out of the cooler. And once you take a bee out of the cooler, you'll know she's ready to be processed if you can kind of shake the jar back and forth, and she moves pretty freely in there. That's when you know she's ready to be processed. And so usually what I do is I'll just dump her out onto some surface, and if you have white, that's great, it works really well. Other colors can work too. Darker colors, just something that's flat and neutral usually helps pretty well. So one of the things that we can do when we look at our bee, remember there's a lot of different photos that I need. I need to be able to see the picture of the face. I need to be able to see a picture of the thorax. And I need to be able to see a picture of the abdomen, including all of the segments back there. And for yellow-faced, yellow-striped bees, I need to see a picture of the underside of the abdomen. That allows me to tell the differences between some very close look-alike species. So when they're completely out is a great time to take a picture of that underside of the abdomen if you have that species. And in this case, I do. So I want to get really close if you can, and this is why a camera with a macro setting is really the best option. You want to get as close as you can, and you want to take a nice picture of the underside of the abdomen. Okay, so now I can see the color of those hairs on the abdomen, which is exactly what I need to see. Also, when she's in this position, I can often take a very good picture of the face. And it's nice to take a nice close-up like this, because then I can see the cheek length, as well as the color of the hairs on her face, and the colors of the hair on the top of her head. I also like to include a profile shot, like this. Okay, and one of the nice things about a shot like this is I can see the hairs on the face, on the thorax, and on the abdomen. And now I want to be able to make sure that I can see every single segment on that abdomen, and then the color patterns there. So you want to sometimes peel those wings apart and make sure you get a nice clear shot. It's okay if your hand is in there, but we really just want to be able to see all of the segments back there on the abdomen. Perfect. And then she's ready. I've taken all of the photos that I need for her. You can see there that her foot is starting to twitch a little bit and she's starting to wake up. But I've taken all the pictures that I can of her. And so what I can do is I can actually just set her in the sun and let her warm up, and she'll slowly warm up and groom herself and fly away. And then I can go on and process the next bee. But before I do that, I want to make sure I enter this one on my data sheet. So because this has a yellow face and a yellow stripe, and you notice that all the hairs on the underside there were black, I know that this is Bombus vosnesenskii. And if you don't know the species of bee that it is, it's totally fine. You can just write Bombus here. And I'm going to write the host plant. In this case, there is no host plant. I found this bee just flying around, probably looking for a nest site. So I'm just going to write nest searching. And then I want to write the photo numbers. So in my camera here, I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to take a look at the photos that I took. And down here, it's going to tell me the number of the photo that I took. And I want to record that information on the data sheet. So these photos started at 2319, and I'm going to write that on here, and that goes through 2324. Okay, and now that's all the photos that I've taken of that bee, and I've entered all the information that I need to from that particular bee on the data sheet. Now I can process my next bee. Again, I can shake the bee in the jar, and if she moves around freely, I know that she's ready to be processed. I can dump her out onto the table. And again, this is not a yellow-faced, yellow-striped bee, so I don't need a picture of the underside of the abdomen. I just need a picture that shows the face, head, thorax, and abdomen. And I can get a lot of that from a single shot with this bee, the way that she's set up. I can get a nice profile shot. And there I can see pretty much everything I need to from a single photo. I'm going to roll her over on her back to make sure that I get a photo of the cheek length and of the face. Sometimes the antennae get in the way there, so you want to make sure, if you can, to get the photo that you need. Okay? So there, really, with just 2 pictures, I can get everything that I need. But there, in this case, I can also get a nice shot there that'll show me every segment of the abdomen. And this species here is Bombus mixtus. It's got brown hairs at the very back of its abdomen, that little crescent on T2 there. And you can see it's got cloudy hairs on its thorax. So a mix of yellow and black hairs and a nice short cheek. So I'm done processing that bee, and I can put her in the sun as well. So now I can write this one as Bombus mixtus. She was also nest searching. And the photo numbers, again, I go into my camera, I press preview, and this goes through 2327. So this is going to be 2325 to 2327. One of the things you can do when you're done processing your bees is you can actually hold them in your hands. It's a really neat opportunity to get up close and personal with a bee and see how they move their wings and groom themselves. It's a really, really neat opportunity. But they do warm up pretty quickly, and it's pretty neat to watch them fly away and notice that even after being in a cooler for a long time, they can go out about their business and just fly away. Oh, there she goes. When you're done with your bumblebee survey, we're going to ask that you also do a brief habitat survey. And there's just a series of questions that you have to answer as you walk around the site. There's some just basic site information at the top of the data sheet, and then we get into the habitat area. The first thing you want to do is decide what is the most appropriate habitat type for the place where you're doing your survey. And you're just going to circle one of those options. So in this case, I'm in a natural area, which is a park setting. So I would circle that. And then you would want to add in the habitat area of the surrounding area. So outside of your hectare, what habitat types do you see there? In this case, I see some woodlands and other areas. So I would include those in sight in addition to the developed park that I'm also in. The next question asks you, how much of the survey area has flowering resources available? And what you want to do there is really just think about, as you did your bumblebee survey, how far did you have to walk before you saw another flower? Were there flowers pretty much everywhere? Or did you have to walk between patches? And how much area did those patches take up? And I don't mean like to be 100% flowering or even 50% flowering, it doesn't have to mean that flowers actually take up 50% of the ground or 50% of what you see. It's really just you can see flowers or look for bumblebees on flowers in 50% of the site at which you're standing, or whatever percentage it is. So how much is flowering? In a site like this, on a day like today, we're probably talking about sort of probably 15 to 20% at the most is flowering resources, as you see here behind me. Here are some examples of what different percentages of flowering resources might look like in the Pacific Northwest. And here are some examples of what it might look like in Nebraska. Then we want to know how many species of flowers that there are. Are there 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, or greater than 10? And by this time, you will have already done your bumblebee survey, so you'll have a pretty good sense of how many flowering resources there are out there. The next thing you're going to do is circle which features you see in the area. And these are all features that are important for bumblebee nests. So did you see any bunch grasses? In this area, I'm in a park that's probably occasionally mowed. There are no bunch grasses here, so I wouldn't circle that. Do you see evidence of rodent holes or tunnels? I did. Do you see any brush piles? Yeah, there's brush piles along the edge here, so I'd include that. There is a fair bit of bare soil here, so I'd include that. There's leaf litter in the woodland areas and along the fence rows here, so I would circle that. Do I see any pine needle duff? Well, in the area behind me here, there are some pine trees, and there is quite a bit of pine duff on the ground there, so I'd also include that. And I don't really see any rock piles here, so I would not circle that one. But those are what those options are. Those are all nesting areas for bumblebees, or areas or things that we think are important for nesting. The next question is all about management. Do you see any mowing here? In this case, I would answer yes, I do see mowing. There's no cattle grazing here, but there probably is some native grazing, maybe some deer. You might see some scat or some tracks, and you'd want to include that. There's no agriculture here. I don't think there's any insecticide or herbicide use, but I might ask the land manager if I had questions about it. There's no fire used here, and there are no honeybee hives. But your site obviously may be different, and you want to answer whatever it is that you have. And then on the back, you're just going to go around and you're going to list the plants that you saw in bloom, the common names, and if you know them, the scientific names, and then to help later, if you need to, you just want to record the photo numbers if you took a photo of those flowers. And that's it. The habitat survey should probably take you 15 to 20 minutes. If you have a lot of plants in bloom or you don't know your plants that well, it may take you a little bit longer. So make sure to leave yourself plenty of time. But we're hoping that this isn't going to be a several hour long habitat assessment. It should be fairly rapid, and you should be able to get through it fairly quickly, especially if you do it after you do your bumblebee survey, because you will have already walked the entire hectare property and you should know the features pretty well by that time. But that's it. When you're done with that, you're done with your bumblebee survey, you're done with your habitat survey, and you can head home and enter your data. So anyway, thanks for being out in the field with me today, and thanks for participating in the Bumblebee Atlas projects. I really appreciate all your help. I couldn't do it without you. I'm sorry that we weren't able to be in person today and share bees together, but hopefully you learned something and feel more confident when June comes around and we can get out in the field and hopefully do our surveys. But again, I do want to remind you that I'm filming this in April, and this is a rapidly evolving situation. So really, please do pay attention to the health professionals in your area and pay attention to your local and state officials about what is safe for you. And also, please pay attention about your own personal safety. That is the most important thing, and there's no reason to jeopardize your personal health for any reason to go out and do bumblebee surveys. If you need to, go do a bumblebee survey in your backyard if that's the safest place for you to do it. We want to make sure that everybody is safe and healthy during this difficult time. But anyway, thanks for your attention, and we'll look forward to seeing you out in meadows looking for bumblebees. Have a great summer.